Hey guys, welcome back to episode 2 of Roid Rage Radio, and today we're going to be talking about the data that we collected and the implications of this data. So just to ask you guys, what is this data, or how did you collect it?
So me and Harrison, we each scraped data from 2 different social media platforms. I scraped from TikTok and he scraped from Reddit, and the methods that we used were very different. In order to scrape from TikTok, I used an extension called ZSchumer. I found this extension online through another professor at the University of Binghamton. Thank you, Dr. Ford. And so basically, I downloaded the files for ZSchumer, and I used Dropbox to add ZSchumer as an extension to my Firefox browser. And after I did that, I would open TikTok on another tab in the same browser, and I would use ZSchumer to collect data after searching specific keywords. We researched the same 4 PEDs, and we also just did a general search of performance-enhancing drugs. When I scraped from TikTok for each topic, I scraped from 100 videos, and I got the comments from the video and the posts, like the data from the comments and the posts. And then after that, I turned them into CSVs, downloaded it onto my computer, and I used Python to further analyze them.
And I scraped Reddit using praw, also known as the Python Reddit API wrapper, also courtesy of Dr. Ford. Thank you very much. And using praw was a little bit easier than Jill's method, as all I had to do was create a Reddit API and a Reddit ID and request data from the specific subreddit that we were looking for, which in this case was r/PEDs. What I really liked about praw was that in addition to scraping the data, it also included the top comment for the post that we were looking at. That way, it provided us a little bit more context into what we were looking at and why. It told us a little bit more about the conversations that were being had, and not just posts that were saying, I like steroids or I recommend this steroid.
So now that I know how you guys collected your data, I was wondering what your CSV files look like.
So when I downloaded the CSV files, I used the command .head in Python to see what I was working with, what were the columns and rows looking like. So the columns that I had for mine, some of them were author name, author following count, author likes count, how many videos that author has, the body of the post, the hashtags, etc. And then for the comments, I got the author, the body of the comment, how many likes the comment got, how many replies the comment got. When I looked at the CSVs prior to making the visualizations, the most important thing to me was the comments, because that is how we can tell what kind of sentiment the videos had in their comments.
So for Reddit, all the data that I scraped ended up being collected in a JSON file. When looking at this data, what it included was the post title, a URL linking to the post, and then the top relevant comment, as well as how many upvotes the post got. These 2 things were really important for my research, as it allowed me to understand the top posts, so what were the posts that a majority of people were seeing, as well as the top comment linked to that post. So not only in addition to what are people seeing most, but what are people agreeing with most. What is the top comment that people see, read, and say, yes, this is something that I agree with and something that I would say to other people, or something that I would recommend other people to take a look at in addition to this post.
My next question would be how you guys visualize this data. Like, how were you able to take it and format it in a way that would be easier for us to understand or just interpret in general?
So for my data, I used a library called Vader Sentiment in Python. I chose to use this library in particular because Vader analyzes the sentiment of the posts and the comments. Prior to me finding this, we were planning on sorting through the comments using negative and positive words, and when I tried doing that, it just wasn't very effective for me, as most of the comments did not include typically positive or negative words at all, and most of them were just purely slang and emojis. So after installing Vader, I used Vader to analyze the sentiment of the body of the posts and the body of the comments individually. So my first graph was the PEDs post sentiment, I Googled or I looked up on TikTok performance enhancing drugs, and I scrolled through 100 videos. I data scraped from 100 videos and the comments of those videos, and what I had gotten from the posts was that around 60% of the posts had a positive sentiment in their body paragraph of the post. Around 35% had a neutral sentiment, and around 10% had a negative sentiment. And then for the comment section, around 600 of the comments had a positive sentiment, around 575 of the comments had a neutral sentiment, and around only 300 of the comments had a negative sentiment about the posts for the performance enhancing drugs. And then my next one, okay, and then the next search that I searched up was Anavar. Anavar is a PED, and it is a popular oral anabolic steroid often used because it is considered mild, especially among beginners and women. So when I did the Anavar post sentiment, around 40% of the posts were positive and only around 20% of the posts were negative. So you can see that there's a very big gap there. And then for the comment section, around 600 of the comments were positive and only around 250 of the comments were negative. The next PED that I searched up in TikTok was Dianabol, also known as D-bol. When I looked it up, I searched it up as just strictly D-bol because of the slang tendencies of TikTok videos. And D-bol is one of the most well-known anabolic steroids, and it's famous for its rapid mass gain, but it comes with some of the nastiest side effects. For my post-sentiment analysis for D-bol, around 60% of the posts were positive and only around 10% of the posts were negative, which again is like a huge gap. And then for the comments, around 450 of the comments were positive, while only right under 200 of the comments were negative. The next PED that we searched up was Test, and Test is just testosterone, which is a hormone your body already makes, but people take Test in order to jack up their testosterone to unnatural levels. For the post sentiment for Test, almost 50% of the posts were positive, while only around 20% of the posts had a negative sentiment. And then for the comments, almost 700 of the comments were positive, and only around 300 of the comments had a negative sentiment. The last PED that we researched was Trenbolene, also known as Tren. Again, I researched just Tren because of the slang that is used in TikTok. And it is an insanely powerful anabolic steroid, but it can turn your body and your brain into a ticking time bomb, as some say, and it has very bad side effects. For the post sentiment, almost 60% of the posts had a positive sentiment, and then only under 20% of the posts had a negative sentiment. And then for the comment, over 550 of the comments had a positive sentiment, and under 200 had a negative sentiment.
For me personally, when I was looking at the Reddit data, I combined both the posts and the comments into one interaction, simply just because of the volume difference between TikTok and Reddit. A Reddit post might have an average of anywhere from 5 to 30 upvotes, while an average TikTok video can have anywhere from 1,000 to hundreds of thousands of likes. That way, it gave us a better idea of the positive and negative interactions on the platform and a better way to compare the two sites. So when I looked at the top 100 posts regarding PEDs on Reddit, I found that almost 60% of the posts were negative and 40% of them were positive. I think that lends a little bit to the more serious nature of Reddit and how people on Reddit tend to talk more about the serious side effects of PEDs rather than glamorizing them. So similar to Jill, the first PED that I looked at was Anavar. Upon looking at Anavar, they were pretty close in positive and negative interactions, but the negative once again shone through, leading to more negative interactions. 57% of the posts regarding Anavar were negative, while the remaining 43% were positive. Looking at the next PED of D-ball, what we saw were almost similar results, but a little bit leaning more towards the negative side. As Jill mentioned earlier, D-ball is a very serious PED with high side effects. 60% of the posts on Reddit regarding D-ball were negative, while the remaining 40% were positive. Our third PED that I looked at was tests, and this is where the results sort of flipped, as there were now more positive interactions on Reddit than negative interactions. Reddit housed almost 53%, or of the 100 interactions that we looked at, 53% of them were positive, while the remaining 47 were negative. And finally, for Trend, this is where we saw the most negative posts, as Trend had 70% of the posts come back as negative, while the remaining 30% came back as positive. When filtering through these posts, we use keywords to determine whether or not this post was positive or negative by listing things such as positive, good, effective, help, success, and so on, and negative, bad, side effects, problem, issues, and so on for negative effects.
After finding the sentiment for each PED, I looked and found the average likes for each search, also through using Python. So the average likes for each video under the search of trend was 20,000 likes. For test, it was around 13,000 likes. For D-ball, it was around 7,500 likes. And for Anavar, it was around 12,500 likes. And when searching up performance-enhancing drugs in general, the average like count was only around 6,000.
Now, when analyzing Reddit, what we saw was that when looking up trend, the total amount of upvotes or likes was 3,000. When looking at test, the total amount of upvotes or likes was 5,000. When looking at D-ball, it was 500. And when looking at Anavar, it was 1,300, or nearly 1,400. Now, this is obviously a very big discrepancy between the like counts between these two platforms, and that lends a little bit more to the different nature of the audiences within these platforms, like we'll talk about in the final episode.
After creating that graph, I wanted to find the percentage of each post per PED when searching up performance-enhancing drugs. So when I searched up performance-enhancing drugs and scraped the data from that, I then used that data to figure out which percentage of these posts were talking about each PED that we researched, Anavar, D-ball, trend, and test. So after creating this graph, I found out that 27.2% of the posts were about Anavar, 27.5% of the posts were about D-ball, 21.4% were about test, and 23.9% were about trend. So from this graph, we can see that it's pretty even all around.
And now, when we were looking at the results from Reddit, I saw that 53.1% of the posts were about test, 26.5% of the posts were about trend, 14.2% of the posts were about Anavar, and 6.2% of the posts were about D-ball. So while the TikTok results were pretty consistent all throughout for all PEDs, most of the posts on Reddit were centered around tests, which is more common and easily accessible for people. Some of the more serious PEDs, such as D-ball and Anavar, seem to have been talked about less, potentially pertaining to how serious they are and how harmful they can be if misused.
So that's it for the second episode of Roid Rage Radio, where in the next episode we're going to be further discussing and pulling conclusions out of our data. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.